He was awakened just after 4 o'clock by a tapping on his shoulder. "What?" he said, wiping the sleep out of his eyes. "I'm sorry, but are you all right?" the female voice asked. The strong sun was shining right behind her head, silhouetting her. He stood up and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean any disrespect. I'll get going." "Wait, it's okay." He blinked hard and his vision cleared. A girl who appeared to be just a couple years younger than him was standing in front of him. She was wearing jeans and a tight black t-shirt that read "Love it or leave it, but never mistreat it," in 2 lines over her breasts. Her slightly curled auburn hair was resting behind her ears. "I just nodded off, I guess," he offered. "For a second there I thought you were just another corpse," she replied. He was deeply embarrassed. He figured himself to be a pretty light sleeper who could wake up if someone so much as crunched a blade of grass under their feet, but his body was shutting down, and his senses were dulling from lack of sleep and prolonged stress. "No, I'm fine," he said, relaxing a little. "Funny place to take a nap." "I suppose." She looked at him suspiciously. "You sure you're all right?" "I swear I just sat down and must have zonked out." "I've been there. This heat isn't helping. That's what I thought at first, that maybe you'd drop dead from heat stroke. I'm glad you're okay." She was relaxing a little, too. She stuck out her right hand. "Hi, I'm Michelle." "Michelle?" He looked confused and left her hand hanging. "This is the part where you say, 'Hi, Michelle, I'm so pleased to meet you,' and so forth." "Oh, sorry." The planet seemed to suddenly be spinning a bit too fast for him. "I'm Rob." He gently shook her hand. "Nice to meet you, Rob." They released their light grips. "You too," he said. "So do you sleep in graveyards a lot?" "No, this would be my first time." "That's good. You're lucky I'm the one who came along and found you." "What do you mean?" "Some people around here aren't so nice." "Really?" "Especially when you've got a car that has a stereo in it parked with the windows down and the keys in the ignition." He reached down and checked his pockets with his palms. "Oh, Jesus." He looked at her. She smiled, but there was concern on her face. "I don't normally do things this stupid. I've been driving for too long." "Where are you from?" "L.A." "You on your way there?" "No, I'm going to meet a friend up north." She nodded, not needing him to elaborate. "It's weird," he said. "My friend's name back in L.A. is Michelle." "I'm sure there are a lot of us out there." "Yeah." He felt like such a dumbass. "I should probably get going. Thanks for waking me up." "Do you have to go right now? You on a schedule or something?" "Time is kind of a factor, but I guess I don't have to go right this second." "Then sit with me a while. You look like you either need a lot more sleep or like you need to wake up a bit more before driving anyway." He shrugged. "I guess I can hang around just a little longer." "Great." She led him across the cemetery, past his car, and across the graves on the other side, until they reached a bench in one of the far corners. They sat down on it. The shadows had elongated enough at that point in the day to make being outdoors more bearable. The wood and metal beneath them was still giving off quite a bit of heat, but there was something soothing in it. It felt good in the ass and leg muscles. "You know anyone here?" she asked. "No, I just stopped to—" He paused, realizing that hanging out in a graveyard might not be normal to most people. "That's cool. Sometimes I just come here because it's so quiet." "Do you know anybody here?" "Mm-hmm," she pointed. "My grandparents are right over there." She was motioning at 2 headstones not far from where they were sitting. They were slick and black. "Nice stones." She giggled. They were always trying to pretend that they were richer than they were. He leaned forward, squinted, and read the names. "So is it Michelle Heston?" She shook her head. "No, it's Michelle Sellers. I got my dad's last name. Sounds like a cheesy soap opera name, doesn't it?" "No, it doesn't," he said politely. "You're sweet, but I think that names that rhyme are for cartoon characters. What's your last name, Rob?" "Barton." "That's a nice name, Rob Barton. Anyway, I didn't really come to see them. I just kind of had to get away from my house, from my parents, you know. I've been there. I could be over hanging out at 7-Eleven with all the other scummy delinquents, but I like to be alone more." "Me too. It's nice just to be in your own space." "Totally. Most people think it's sad to be alone a lot, but I really prefer it." "You in school or anything?" He noticed he had adopted some of her speech patterns very quickly. He remembered when he used to speak a bit more flip like her, and for the first time, he felt like he was getting old. "I'm in my senior year at Hoover High." "You're in high school?" He felt even older. "What classes are you taking?" "All of them. I used to skip sometimes, but I really want out of this town eventually, so I'm trying to be good." "I would have guessed you were already in college." "People always think I'm older. I don't know why." "I know. I'm probably about 5 years older than you, and I hope this doesn't sound too patronizing, but you are very mature for your age." She nodded like she'd heard it 1,000 times before. "I mean it," he said. "You carry yourself like you've got your shit together." "That's so sweet," she said jokingly, and patted him on the knee. "By the way, where the hell are we?" "Vuton." "Vuton? Never heard of it." "Of course not. It's just dirt and houses. It sucks." "What, are you traveling without a map?" "I mostly know where I'm going, just not where I am." "Just like a man." "Well, I don't need to know every town along the way." "As long as you know where you're going, I suppose." "I do." They sat in a comfortable silence for a few moments, breathing in the dusty air, staring out at nothing in particular. They just sat there enjoying each other's company. Michelle was first to break the silence. "I like you, Rob," she said bluntly. He looked at her, understanding perfectly that she meant it in a platonic way. "I like you too," he replied, meaning it as well. "Here, I want you to have this." She unsnapped her leather bracelet and handed it to him. He examined it. "Really? I like it, but why?" "It's lucky, and you seem like you could use it." He snapped it on. His wrist was a little bigger than hers, so he had to use the first snap. He held out his arm. It was brown leather suede and about a half-inch wide. "Looks good on you," she said, pleased. "Thank you." It went with his brown hair and eyes. "You're welcome." She stood up and stretched. "I should probably be getting back." He stood also. "And I should be getting back on the road." She nodded and stuck out her arm for another handshake. "Well, I'm glad to know you, Rob Barton." He shook her hand. "You too, Michelle Sellers." Then, still holding the shake, she placed her left hand over their entwined hands and said, "You be careful." It was a perfect moment of understanding. "I will," he replied. "Good," she said as they released their grips. She smiled and turned to leave. He called after her. "Everything will get better for you, too." "I know it will. I'll be all right." He watched her walk past the gates, and then he headed for the car. Briefly, he thought about driving up to her and asking her if she needed a ride, but somehow he felt that she would prefer walking. He got in the car, started it up, and drove around the curve in the road, following it to the exit. He looked from side to side, hoping to catch one last glimpse of her, but she was nowhere in sight. He was mildly saddened at that. He turned the car back the way he had come, and headed towards the freeway. Chapter 2. "Gotta get there. Not going to sleep. I can sleep afterwards," he was thinking to himself over and over. "I'll kill him. I'll kill him and then I can sleep." He was so close that it would be stupid to stop and rest. Besides, could he really get any shut-eye, knowing that the end of his hassles was only a little over 300 miles away? While keeping his left hand on the wheel, he reached over with his right hand and felt through the pile of goods on the passenger seat. His hand grabbed a cool, cylindrical shape. He placed the Coca-Cola between his legs and felt around for the second item. When his hand wrapped around the rectangular thin cardboard, he picked it up and dropped it into his lap, where the Coke can kept it from sliding around. He began to shred the cardboard to get to the pill bottle inside. The childproof lid popped off without too much effort. He popped through the foil covering beneath it, also easily, but his fingers were too thick to pick the pills out. He put the bottle up to his mouth and shook it. Several of the dry capsules stuck to his tongue. It felt like there were about a half a dozen of those little sour pills sucking the spit right out of his mouth. They were beginning to dissolve. Part of him enjoyed the jaw-clenching bitterness. He popped the Coke's tab, took a large swig, felt it foam rapidly, and gulped hard. He could feel the remaining clumps of the pill slide down his esophagus. One got stuck at the base of his throat, and no matter how many mouthfuls of soda he slammed, it would not go down. He could feel it slowly fizzing down there on the back of his tongue. He grimaced and wanted to get his hands on the genius that made those shitty tablets. He looked at the mangled box of Caffey-Wake pills and tossed it out the window. He pressed the gas pedal down a little harder. The speedometer hit the 85-mile-per-hour mark. The truck handled it easily. The speed limit was 65, but there had been a few cars on the road that had still passed him by, so he should not get bothered about it. If a cop tried to pull him over, it would be a major hitch in his plans. Sure, he could kill a cop, maybe even a whole force, but it would be so much more work, and definitely a huge delay. He would have to worry about the stolen plate being called in, and trying to destroy as many of the pursuers and dashboard cameras as he could. It would all only add to his ever-increasing headache that the punk-ass was causing him. How dare that little shit so audaciously insult him with his spying? Who was he? Who did he think he was? The acid pool in his gut lurched a little, but it was not just from the pills. His migraine, at least, was actually beginning to subside. It was probably because of the caffeine. He figured he was good to go for a couple more hours, which should be more than enough. The jitters were starting to hit him, and he turned on the radio to knock the boredom down a peg. Black Sabbath's War Pigs came blasting out of the speakers on the classic rock station. On the Satan laughing spreads his wings line, he took both hands off the wheel and stuck his arms out in a crucifixion pose, at least from the waist up. His left arm stuck straight out the window, and the wind played with it, and he played back with the wind, letting his hand cut through it in soaring ups and downs. A smile stretched across his face. The truck was slowly veering into the oncoming lane. He felt like he was flying towards his destiny. He couldn't wait to snap that kid's neck, rip his arms and legs out of their sockets, and urinate on the dead fucker's torso. He wanted to tear the flesh off of those limbs with his teeth. Wings and thighs were the best. What was there to do after that, though? Life would tell him when that moment came. Killing that little insect that dared to intrude in his waking hours should stop that mosquito-like incessant buzzing in his ears. The fact that he had dared, even more invasively, to intrude into his dreams would not only make killing him be a pleasure, it would also be a stepping stone to the next rock in the pond. He didn't know how wide the pond was, or what was happening on the other side, but he knew it was his purpose to keep going until he got there. The song ended, and the DJ came on briefly before running a string of annoying advertisements. He scowled and returned his hands to the wheel. He pulled the truck back into the appropriate lane. The persistent babbling from the radio continued. The straight stretch of road seemed to go on forever. He was still trying to make his way back to I-10. Then he would connect with the 101 freeway and head north until he got a feel for which exit he should take. Maybe the little shit would take a nap, and that maddening hum would increase again into that high-pitched feedback he'd suffered off and on before. It was the kind of piercing sound that only a dog should have to hear. It would maybe get louder and act as a homing device. On one of the times he had slept, and seen through the boy's eyes, he had gotten a lay of the entire neighborhood he lived in. The fucker was taking a walk with some hot piece of ass, and instead of banging her, or at least trying to, he was too busy whining about bullshit. It had been so draining to listen to. He couldn't remember what their conversation had been about when he woke up, but that was probably because he had been trying so hard not to hear it. What a boring little piece of shit. He could simply ask someone where Garfield and Kingston intersected, or he could even check a map. The boy had been stupid enough to look up at his own street sign. He was getting so close to him he could taste it, beneath the bitterness. It created a mix of sweet and sour flavors. It seemed to be taking so much longer to get back to the westward-heading freeway than it had to get to the mom-and-pop gas station. The truck's tank had been practically empty, and Life said he had to take the next exit, or he would stall right there on the freeway. The next exit had been Commercial Road, which, ironically, was just a 2-lane, barely paved stretch of asphalt that cut through a small mountain. There was nothing but walls of rock on either side of the road. When the land finally opened up a bit, there was nothing but dry, brown shrubs in the dust between the road and where the mountain walls continued on. Signs had kept popping up, promising him that gas, food, and rest were only a few more miles ahead. It had still been early in the evening, and although I-10 had been jammed, Commercial Road had been completely deserted. The promises from the road signs were made truths when he pulled into the dirt and gravel-filled parking lot. The pine green sign had piss-yellow letters painted on it that spelled the name of the place, Ahab's Gas. He had been low on cash. He had plenty when he had driven into Kansas, and plenty still when he had driven out, especially after emptying a register at a motel there. He had paid for his room, but when the clerk had given him hell about checking out at 12:30 in the afternoon instead of 11 in the morning, and had tried to charge him for the next day as well, he had put his fist through the guy's face. It had crunched inward, with mild resistance, against his knuckles. He'd wrenched his hand back and forth to free his hand from the bone and the goo. At first the body had just flailed back and forth with his hand movements, but a moment later, the suction which had been created from the impact gave, and the body flew back against the wood-paneled wall, and fell over in a heap. He turned the register around on the counter to face him, and repositioned it back into its own clean spot. He'd cocked his head to one side. He hadn't known which button opened its drawer, but there was a slot for a key in it. However, he hadn't felt like searching the guy or the place for the key with the proper fit, so he had just brought his bloodied and pulp-covered fist down on it and watched the keypad explode and the metal frame yield with the blow. The bell, which was to be dinged for service, had fallen to the floor. He'd watched it fall in slow motion. It had clanked twice in its bounces before it lay still. "Guess you won't be getting that," he'd said to the leaking, faceless body. Then he'd let out a very amused laugh. A scream had cut the laughter short,